The Village. From the very beginning, we knew we wanted the game to be set in an alternative history, dystopian setting. An alternative history, where a single event changes the course of history, gives us the freedom to create a unique and original universe, while grounding that world and giving it depth. We could push visual ideas to extremes without being handcuffed to real history. We chose exaggerated shapes to give the architecture pure personality and style, but combined that with realistic, historically accurate materials to give the world a sense of tangibility and texture. Wellington Wells is a dystopia, but the Wellies have done this to themselves. They aren't necessarily oppressed by Big Brother. They're oppressed by their own false happiness. Their denial of unpleasant facts is what's causing society to crumble. Wellies think they're in a utopia. At least they do when they're taking their government-provided drug, joy. The image above was the first concept we made for the game. The left side is what we call the village, the area where our society thrives. The historic Tudor buildings are covered in cheery stripes, inspirational posters, and futuristic technology. The right side shows the garden district, which has been neglected and therefore preserves the troubling history that the village is trying so hard to forget. Arthur Hastings. We wanted the main character to be normal, perhaps even an anti-hero. What better English archetype than the polite, awkward, paper-pushing everyman? Arthur is inspired by stop-motion characters, with long limbs, exaggerated features, and tactile materials. To give him a bookish look, we added crimped hair and glasses. It was important that he be non-traditionally attractive, even slightly goofy. Arthur is always presentably dressed, but never stands out. When the game begins, he is a bureaucrat, obedient to authority. He works as an archivist who redacts upsetting articles from past newspapers. But Arthur's past has its own secrets. Confronted with one, he decides to go off his joy in order to remember it. Citizens of Wellington Wells. Wellies and Wellettes. The upstanding citizens of Wellington Wells appear happy and stylish, with outfits inspired by 60s fashions icons, such as Mary Quant and Pia Cardin. The women's clothing designs have repeating, simplistic, modern patterns that reject the past. For the men's clothes, we decided on a more traditional 60s British look to keep us grounded in the time and place. We gave the men a stylish edge, however, through use of details like pork pie hats, turtlenecks, and mod glasses. Welly. The first iteration of a welly face. The male wellies and female wellettes each have just one face. So our challenge was to make the face look iconic, dapper, and expressive, while still generic enough not to draw attention to their repetition in-game. We designed wellies to appear lanky, friendly, and slightly boyish, with their crimpy hair and large ears. Wellette. Wellettes are all stylish but still generic, as if you mixed fashion models such as Twiggy and Jean Shrimpton with Miss Moneypenny from the 60s James Bond movies. They sport futuristic mod dresses, beehives, bobs, shags, cat-eye makeup, and trendy light pink lipstick. The simple shapes and bright colours on their designer dresses would make a bold statement if not for the fact that everyone else is wearing the same thing. Criers. We needed a special alarm NPC, drawing a crowd whenever a downer is spotted, so we created the Crier, an archetypical British old lady, fond of tea and snooping. We had hoped that each crier could push a grocery cart that you could hear squeaking from a distance, but this proved to be technically awkward. We gave her a dotty cardigan, floral dress, straw hat, and a squishy, buck-toothed face. Her glasses make her look slightly cross-eyed. Bobbies. The bobbies are the enforcers, the muscle, taller and stronger than your average welly. We designed their grinning masks so they look like they'll head off to the pub after their shift, chumming it up with their mates. They all seem to have Cockney accents and are always endeavouring to ameliorate their vocabulary. Early character exploration. Concepts of the village. We wanted the village to feel quintessentially English, with quaint Tudor half-timber houses refurbished with modern signage, paint and bunting. Above, the Statue of Happiness, commissioned to keep everyone upbeat. Village architecture. Our world is procedurally generated. Making each house interactive would have been too time-consuming and would have slowed down the player's computer too much. So, we made a small number of buildings the player can enter and then filled the gaps with non-interactable ones. We needed these filler buildings to look good, but not be so distinctive that players would notice that they repeat. Software controls how these individual tiles are laid out, but our artists create those tiles. Wellies would rather take joy and decorate than fix their rotting architecture. Too depressing. So they've painted jaunty stripes over the historic buildings, and it wouldn't be England without bunting, awnings and flower pots. Anything to make the place happy. Wellies don't like to think of buildings being abandoned, so they've painted the boarded-up, non-interactive buildings to look like the residents have merely gone for tea. Joy lighting. The exterior lighting of the game world changes according to the time of day, weather, and which drugs you might be taking. Normal lighting depicts drizzly, grey England. On Joy, the world perks up as we enhance saturation and fringe effects. At first, that wasn't obvious enough to sell the feeling, so after some experimentation, environment artist Emmanuel Lawson added bright, colourful stripes to buildings, turned the colour of the sidewalks to purple, and made plants pink. Joy propaganda. The game uses posters and signage to give you clues about the world, to push the atmosphere, and to drive home the lore. Just by looking around, you can see what wellies value: happiness, conformity, technology, and enthusiastic plans for the future. Vintage advertisements gave us inspiration, everything from photos to hand-drawn graphics. Jack Worthing, the voice of Wellington Wells. The face of the regime, Uncle Jack is a constant upbeat presence, the love child of BBC announcers and game show hosts. Everyone looks up to him for advice, entertainment, motivation and comfort. We filmed a live actor, Julian Casey, then projected the footage onto television screens in the game. We added film grain and made his shows black and white to keep him from clashing with the animated world. Of course, in the early 60s, all British television was in black and white. Julian Casey was the perfect fit. He manages to project charm and benevolence, yet convey a sinister smarminess underneath. We hired a film art director, Ian Longore, to work with us to find the props and costumes and to build the backdrops. 60s futurism. 1960s Britain had its own style of science fiction, in shows like The Prisoner, The Avengers, and of course Doctor Who. We were excited to give Wellington Wells a retrofuturism all its own. Wellies are running out of resources, but spend them on over-engineered, sleek, plastic gadgets that are almost useless. The top right image is a cheery chap, a robot that exists to give out compliments. Technology in Wellington Wells is designed to ensure that you're happy. Sometimes the tech is friendly, like the mood booths, classic English red phone booths, converted into joy dispensers. Other inventions are more menacing. The peepers, for instance, were inspired by the ominous rover from The Prisoner. The designs are intentionally silly and kitschy, as if they come from a BBC set with a limited budget. One of the key rules we made when conceptualising the technology was that its actions could not be too magical or sophisticated. It had to feel like something that could have been invented in the 60s. Parks and statues. Wellies love their parks. Whether for cloud watching or playing on the mechanical kiddie scooter ride, the handcrafted village parks were one of the few exteriors that the art team could control. So we pushed the sparkly, happy 1960s atmosphere. Village signage. One side effect of joy is that wellies have trouble remembering things, so signage is very important to them. Municipal reminders keep them doing just what they should be doing. Our artists work closely with our writers to design all the propaganda and advertisements. 2D artist Sarah Hamilton had to absorb the palettes, compositions, fonts and shapes of the period to recreate signage that felt authentic. Interiors. Although we experimented with procedurally generated interiors, we ran into technical complications. So, we decided to handcraft all the interiors. This meant the artists and designers had complete control. We went with a look that was heavily inspired by the mid-century modern style, with bright colours and sleek, simple designs. We used geometric patterns in 60s palettes of orange, olive greens and browns, along with wooden accents like fox wood panelling and slick wooden upholstery frames. This look symbolises the wellies' sensibilities, forward-thinking, stylish and simplistic. The interiors also reflect the 1960s rejection of the old. Wellies plastered and wallpapered over their old lives, but if you look in their closets, you'll find vestiges of the old wallpaper and cast-off antiques. Sarah Hamilton designed the wallpaper to be simple and pared down, referring to a classic mid-century design. Wellies have replaced traditional paintings with modern art. The Church of Simon Says. The citizens of Wellington Wells vaguely remember that they've done something terrible, but their original sin is that they refuse to remember it, let alone repent, but they still long for commandment and punishment. So they've turned the village church into a venue for Simon Says, where losers are zapped into catatonia. The pub. No English town would be complete without a traditional pub. With Victorian panelling and handsome leather upholstery, the signs and posters reflect traditional pub signs. But the signs for real ale suggest that wellies may have been making do with substitutes. Odds and ends. The economy of Wellington Wells has broken down. Fortunately, it's perfectly fine to trade in your old cast-offs. One of the first establishments we designed, Lionel Cashier's Odds and Ends shop, is in a traditional Tudor half-timber building. But we chose colours and fonts for his signage that felt more modern and slightly cheap. Butcher shop. The butcher shop reflects the resource shortage in Wellington Wells. The butcher, Reg Cutty, is happy to buy your old fat. In return, he sells V meat, which no one seems to know the provenance of. Merchants are all jolly townies, with moustaches, boating hats and thick West Country accents. Thomasina House. The Criers who live in the Thomasina house are hoarders obsessed with cats, gossip and tea. But the cats in their needlepoint and diaries are suspiciously non-cat-like. Their house is full of bric-a-brac, old newspapers and stuffy floral wallpaper. Chemist Shop A. Stuart Adams' chemist shop is sleek and futuristic, with yummy adverts for joy. Sally Boyle. While Arthur is an everyman, Sally Boyle is mod and glamorous, channeling Emma Peel, Twiggy and Eddie Sedgwick. Sally never believed her mother's advice that clever girls end up lonely. She's charted her own course in life. As both an experimental chemist and the village's most popular socialite, her design is slick and mod, with bold graphic shapes. Her dress is made of modern materials like vinyl, and her goggles functions both as a stylish accessory and chemical eye protection. Sally's pad is the height of futuristic mod. Pushed to an unsettling degree, she throws exclusive parties here, so it's hidden away in the back of a rundown building. Bottom left, Sally on the cover of the Locan fashion magazine So Mod. Bottom right, Sally's advertisement for her interplanetary travel agency. Sally's house. Sally's house, and even the name of her business, Sally's interplanetary travel agency, reflect her lifelong dream of space travel. As teens, she and Arthur imagined flying away on a rocket ship together. At some level, Sally has always been interested in escape. The village pop star. What would swinging 60s England be without its own iconic pop star? Nick Lightbearer is the mod heartthrob of Wellington Wells, with his ruffled suit, groupies and groovy pad. The inspiration for Nick comes from dandyish British rockers like Mike Jagger. Austin Powers only wishes he could be as cool as Nick. Nick Lightbearer and the Make-Believes are top of the charts in Wellington Wells, and their upbeat songs about being happy. Posters for their shows are inspired by psychedelic rock posters of the 1960s. The Ocaron newspaper office. The Ocaron newspaper is a major source of lies in Wellington Wells. The building's exterior is chunky, jagged cement resembling a bloated spaceship, but the interior is a drab, bureaucratic mix of rusts, olives and browns. The carpet has coffee stains no one has bothered to clean. Police headquarters. We wanted the police headquarters to feel Orwellian, imposing and intimidating. The top heaviness of the building is subliminally threatening, looking as if it could crush you at any moment. The pointed front was designed to look aggressive. Brutalist buildings are often constructed of raw concrete and are associated with government and authoritarianism. The fun thing about designing brutalist buildings is that they're so sculptural, often made up of large, abstract and expressive shapes. The Bobbies need to get around the village quickly, so the design team invented Bobby Poppers, kiosks that pop bobbies out onto the street in a puff of pink smoke. Players learn that bobbies zip around underground inside the sleek pneumatic tube system. Then, like the firemen in Truffaut's adaptation of Fahrenheit 451, they slide up to street level via a metal pole. The Jacobin Club. Everyone loves Uncle Jack, but his fan club, the Jacobin Society, loves him more than anyone else. Naturally, they have portraits of him as great English historical figures, Members of the club are more traditional than regular wellies, so their building was inspired by a Jacobean manor house, sturdy, elegant, and aristocratic. Victoria's house. Victoria's house is naturally Victorian, although her mother was the daughter of an Indian Maharaja. She is devoted to her father, General Sir Robert Byng. Like him, Victoria is a stickler for rules and duty. Posh and upper class, Victoria has an affinity for horses, and her tweed clothing and boiler hat come from a dressage uniform. Her house is elegant, and she has put effort into making her bedroom and bathroom lavish and feminine, while the public rooms are more smoky and aristocratic. The Parade District. The Parade District is modelled on London's posh boulevards and large civic buildings. The architecture is a mix of old establishment Victorian and Georgian buildings, along with show-off brutalist structures. It's home to the most influential establishments. The Clayton Design Centre, where Davy Hackney designs the latest fashions, the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, where the latest technology is conceived, and the Broadcast Tower, home of the Wellington Wells Broadcast Corporation and the Executive Committee. Originally, we thought the Parade District might be awash in sewage, with bureaucrats using rope bridges to travel between buildings. As the game evolved, we decided to keep the Parade District rich and posh, pushing the notion that this is where the power is. Parade District signage. The Parade District establishments are posh. Their signage is more elegant than the villages, and it references upper-crust English activities like croquet. Parade District concepts. The Parade District was inspired by the London neighbourhoods of Chelsea, Regent Street and Soho. It was designed to feel regal and imposing. Unlike the village, which is full of colour, the Parade District consists of a cold, stone, serious buildings whose accent colours are the red, white and blue of the Union Jack, plus gold. Our glorious victory statue. Everywhere you look, the Parade District has British flags and memorials to the victory. That's what wellies call the sudden, inexplicable German withdrawal in 1947 after 4 years of occupation. The statue of a bulldog, a quintessential symbol of England, defeating a German eagle reflects the wellies' denial about losing the war. The most difficult and most important aspect of creating this statue was giving it a sense of drama and movement. The Office. The Department of Printing, Recycling and Archives. We wanted Arthur's office to epitomise bureaucracy. The Parade District workers dress more conservatively than village wellies. The coldly futuristic white walls are offset by the chaotic mess created by a broken bureaucratic system, with workers unable to even remember what they did 10 minutes ago. Office life in the Parade District. Many institutional structures of the 1960s, such as the BBC headquarters, were actually Art Deco buildings from a few decades earlier. The interior Parade District workspaces are sleek, white and minimal, channeling their futuristic ideals. The space is broken up by black lines that draw your eye to the Wellington Wells crest and to mid-century accents like the large clock and brightly coloured filing cabinets. Some concepts are signs for our introduction to Arthur's workplace at the Department of Printing, Recycling and Archives. We get the impression that his colleagues are far more interested in festivities than in getting work done. Indeed, he attends a birthday party with a piñata that turns out not to be a piñata at all. Clayton Design Centre. The design centre is the source of Wellington Wells's most mod designs. Their heavy, cement exterior was loosely inspired by the former Whitney Museum building in New York. Our fashions were inspired by iconic 60s designers and artists. Warhol, Hockney, Quant, Cardin, and Antonioni's film Blow Up, the design centre's own creative guru, David Hackney, dictates what's in and what's out every season. The Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. In the 1960s, real-life architects tore down historic buildings to create brutalist machines for living. The DSIR is thus in a brutalist building where wellies invent their retro-futuristic technology. This cold and impersonal building is all out of proportion to human scale. The high-tech future envisioned here is quite different from what you see in the warm, cosy historic buildings or in the organic ruins of the Garden District. Inside is a small museum displaying the village's grandiose visions for future technology, including a telephone booth that allows you to play music. If you bring your own records to play on the provided gramophone, on the shop floor researchers are developing a portable flamethrower for quickly cooking meals, a pneumatic cannon, a peeper that waters lawns, and an electrowave simulator that we are still not entirely sure the use of. DSIR signage. Wellington Wells Broadcasting Corporation. The Wellington Wells Broadcasting Corporation is where the Uncle Jack show is filmed. Ian Longore, the art director in charge of all of the props, costumes and sets for the live-action shoot, used our concepts when constructing the set. They were inspired by a combination of a 1960s game shows and a BBC News set. Radio Tower. The broadcast tower may look crazy and futuristic, but it's inspired by the real-life BBC tower in London. In the 1960s, even television felt institutional. There were only 3 channels, and 2 of them were the government-run BBC. Our broadcast tower looms over all of Wellington Wells, broadcasting Uncle Jack's chipper propaganda. Naturally, people at the top of society want their office to be in the highest building. The broadcast tower is the centre of power in Wellington Wells. It has the only train connection to the mainland in its basement. All the most important wellies work here. The executive committee runs the city, but they are no more competent than Arthur's co-workers. Their office's cheerful disarray in the midst of brutalist government architecture symbolises their drugged inability to manage the city. Bridges. Wellington Wells is an English city dispersed over a cluster of small, interconnected islands. In real English towns, bridges are intended to allow people to cross back and forth. But in Wellington Wells, bridges now function to keep people in their place. They are checkpoints to prevent wellies from venturing into the ruined Garden District and to keep downers out of the village. Although the bridges serve practical purposes, like keeping plague confined to one island, they are also symbolic. They allow proper citizens to turn a blind eye on the problems occurring on the other side, and they keep the sad downers in the Garden District ostracised from society. The image here is the lobby separating Eel Pie Home in the Garden District from Maidenhome in the village. This lobby is on the Garden District side, hence its bleakness. It was inspired by typical government offices, with its stained carpet, off-white walls and ticket dispenser. Here, on the Salamanca Bridge, named for one of Wellington's great victories, wastrels from the Garden District wait their turn to enter the rehabilitation centre, where they attempt to transform themselves back into proper citizens of Wellington Wells so that they can go home. Bridge concepts. Depending on where they are, the bridges can be vastly different styles. Bridges between the modern areas like the village and the parade district are mostly modern and brutalist, reflecting the Wellies' proverb, "Happy is the country that has no past." The makeshift wood and tin bridge on the top left, however, was constructed by a wastrel to separate two areas of the garden district. Night. At night, all good citizens of Wellington Wells should be indoors. There's a curfew for your own benefit. After all, if you're not in bed and not a bobby, you're probably up to no good. We designed the village to look eerie after dark, when the bright, happy colours give way to shadows, punctuated only by the ominous glow of the beef-eaters, joy detection gates that barricade the street. Peepers and jubilators patrol the streets at night. Nighttime represents the true darkness beneath the cheerful facade of Wellington Wells. Nighty-night. Uncle Jack lulls Wellies to sleep with his horrific nighty-night bedtime stories, while warning citizens that it's not safe to go out after dark or Foggy Jack will get them. Jubilators are basically motorised vacuums in the shape of teapots. They are a jaunty design for a vexing problem in Wellington Wells: how to remove dead bodies without upsetting people. They roam the streets at night playing ice cream truck tunes. They're prehensile snozzles, suctioning up inconvenient corpses. Thanks to jubilators, villagers can wake up and return to their happy utopia. House of Curious Behaviours. Not everyone is asleep after curfew. Some kinds of fun can only be had at night. The Reform Club, known to developers as the House of Curious Behaviours, is a private punishment club with an interior reminiscent of Clockwork Orange. It seems Wellies have an urge to be punished, though they can't quite remember for what. There are a number of rules when entering the club. Members must wear rubber catsuits to protect themselves from the sting of the tickler, a modification of the Bobbies' electric truncheon. Naturally, the club has a painting paying tribute to the tickler, hung in the grand stairwell. The Hippo Club, aka the Black Death. Due to their keen sense of smell, doctors can actually sniff out downers. The better to medicate them once they are caught. We needed the doctors to be super creepy, so we designed them to be tall and lanky, with a vulture's posture. They fancy themselves ladies' men, sprucing up their dark trench coats with Tyrolean hats, an effect slightly spoiled by their garish yellow wellies, as rubber boots are known in England. The doctor's house is the village eyesore, covered in black soot, the old furniture and garbage strewn everywhere, like an abandoned fraternity. Indeed, amongst themselves, the doctors act like giddy undergraduates. They love to play pranks on one another. The house, a former home for wayward girls, is riddled with silly booby traps. Doctors refer to themselves as hippos, after the Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. Wellington Health Institute. Where do the doctors work? At the Wellington Health Institute, of course. A combination medical school and experimental treatment facility. Back when Joy was still working properly, the institute was a normal health service, but these days the doctors are only concerned with finding the source of the spreading plague and seeking a permanent solution for wellies going off their joy and becoming wastrels. The doctors' clinical trials are nightmarish, their operating theatres inspired by historical paintings of gruesome Victorian medical colleagues. The doctors who work and study there, however, aren't daunted by the macabre setting. They'll gleefully steal cadaver parts and scribble naughty cartoons on the chalkboard. Butcher House. The village butcher Reg Cutty lives above his shop in a dark, sinister house with traditional Victorian wallpaper. Although it's hard to tell in the cold lighting, all accents in his house are red. Wellies love their V-meat, though no one's sure exactly what's in it. Good old Reg, however, he's just put the finishing touches on elaborate machines to process suspiciously shaped packages into meat cakes. The player may be asked to help Reg with a possibly heinous package. From liquefying to processing to packaging, Reg's arcane contraptions prepare the meat to be sold. To design these machines, we did a lot of research into real meat processing. Want to know how the sausage is made? Turns out you may not. Ploughboys. The Ploughboys are a gang of thugs who beat up weaker wellies for fun. They were the perfect excuse to add the rockers and greasers of the 1960s to our world. They sport leather jackets, sunglasses, and pompadours, and they are the only characters in our game wearing jeans. Some even sport motorcycle helmets, though no one has a working motorcycle anymore. Gemma Olsen's house. Reporter Gemma Olsen may have a crazy crime wall, but she isn't crazy. She's well on her way to solving the mysteries of Wellington Wells. Gemma's house conveys her two sides: an unassuming bachelorette who loves flowers and a badass detective. Her main rooms are in various shades of pinks and greens, while her workroom is dark and smoky. To create the documents on her crime wall, we needed to find a balance of size, spacing, and fonts. To create the sense that Gemma had been gathering clues from many sources, some of the papers have torn edges, and some are more yellowed than others. Undergrounds. Wellington Wells has a complex network of underground tunnels and factories. The old subway system, the Wellington Under, hasn't functioned since the war, but then wellies discovered a new fuel, motoline, resublimated thiomotoline. They used the train tunnels for motoline pipelines. Underground, you can also find the maintenance facility for the bizarrely tea kettle-shaped jubilators, and see the mines where wellies delve for their motoline. Inspired by the look of the movie Brazil, the undergrounds are where wellies keep the town's infrastructure running. Many of the undergrounds, however, show signs of industrial accidents and general incompetence. Their disarray is an indication that Wellington Wells is falling apart. The undergrounds are also how our heroes can fast travel safely from island to island, without fussing with bridge gates, plague wastrels, or bobbies. Shelters. Home sweet home. We designed the underground shelters to be places where you can safely sleep and plot your survival. Train engineers and workers used to live down here. They drew chalk pictures of sunshine and flowers to help them cope with the endless darkness. The fact that so many of these spaces are abandoned tells you that Wellington Wells is not functioning properly anymore. We needed to make these dark, dingy industrial spaces feel safe and homey, so we cozied up the lighting, particularly near the beds. Electrical maintenance undergrounds. Motoline mines. Although Wellington Wells is out of resources, they do have motoline. Every speculative fiction game needs its own magical fuel, right? Resublimated thiomotoline powers everything in Wellington Wells. We thought it would be interesting to explore an alternative fuel system, so motoline is a resource that is both harvested and processed. The raw form became giant purple crystals mined deep below the parade district, but mining motoline is risky, especially if you delve greedily and too deep, leading to one of the more tense sequences in the game. Hayworth Labs. Hayworth Labs is one of the most important locations of the game. It is the source of all joy in Wellington Wells. It's a giant, brutalist, industrial monstrosity, looming on the horizon as it puffs toxic clouds and flushes toxic waste into the water. Clearly, the village was willing to invest huge resources in that place that creates their happiness. The lab may have started as a stodgy institute studying 19th century phrenology, the discredited notion that the shape of your head determines your personality. But after the victory, the executive committee urged the institute's director, Harry Hayworth, to find a pharmaceutical cure for the Wellies' melancholia. Dr. Verloc. An enigmatic character at the heart of Wellington Wells's mysteries. Dr. Anton Verloc was inspired by Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangeglove and by assorted Bond villains. He is unconcerned about the human costs of his research. For story reasons, we needed Verloc to be attractive, which is why he sports such an arty, mad scientist hairdo and slick black attire. The Garden District. Wellies don't want to be reminded of their shameful defeat, so they've blocked off the Garden District, the bombed-out parts of town they've been unable to restore. Unlike the ever-happy village, this area reveals Wellington Wells's real history, from its wartime propaganda posters to its graffiti. Despite its bombed-out craters and ruins, it is overgrown with flowers, and there is a certain craziness to the lamplight in the old interiors, illuminating the worn Victorian furniture. When did the Garden District become a ghetto for wastrels who can't take joy anymore? No one quite remembers. No one can tell you when the bridges between the islands became high-tech checkpoints, either. Well, perhaps Dr. Faraday can tell you. She invented the surveillance systems in Wellington Wells, but unfortunately, she's no longer receiving visitors. Wastrels and wastrelettes. Wastrels are wellies who can't tolerate joy anymore. It makes them see eyes everywhere, so they can't help but be downers. They talk about the past, and no proper, decent citizen wants that, so wastrels have been chased off into the Garden District. Now their once spiffy clothing has been torn to shreds. We wanted them to seem sad and sympathetic, even though they can be dangerous to the player. The Garden District concepts. To evoke a feeling of nature and purity, we wanted the Garden District to look like an overgrown English countryside with rotting hills, fields, wildflowers, and native trees, elms, willows, crabapples, and oaks. Crumbling stone walls line the roads, and remnants of medieval castles are scattered over the hills. If you look hard, you might even see pagan stone circles. We needed this place to reflect our alternative history, so you'll also find wartime relics like unexploded ordnance and the odd V1 flying bomb. But the Garden District isn't just old England. It's the Britain of folklore, both the seen and the unseen. We were inspired by witchy stylized images, as well as by hobbit-like settlements. The crumbling architecture gave us an excuse to explore strange shapes and spaces. Garden District signage. The Garden District signs were inspired by actual wartime propaganda. The poster designs reflect the printing techniques used in the period. Older posters were more watercolour-like, whereas later posters were more graphic. We also paid attention to how paper would have aged over time. Interiors. The Garden District interiors have been in a ruined state ever since the war. No one bothered to rebuild afterward. Wastrels live in a constant state of melancholia, surrounded by their past. Even so, these traditional English homes, with their antique furniture, personal mementos, and Victorian wallpaper, can seem cosier than houses in the village. The colour palettes are warm and rustic, deep reds, purples, and greens. The old roofs sag under their own weight. The Victorian wallpaper is peeling away, and the wood is rotting. The elegant furniture and fixtures are warped and tarnished. Nature has overtaken these houses with vines, mass and flowers. There are no perfect angles in these interiors. Ollie Starkey. Ollie, the mad Scotsman, is the last character the player controls. He is an ex-soldier, tough and hardy, but his memory is shattered. It's like a church made of cheese and all the congregation is mice. Decent wellies hate him, so the village is particularly dangerous. That's why he camps out in the Garden District in the abandoned Wellington Wells train station. You'll never find Ollie in mod clothing or a happy face mask. He still wears his uniform, except for his plaid pants, and carries military gear. Wellington Wells train station. The train station is a place that wellies would rather forget. Their darkest moment took place here during the occupation. In the shadows, you can find clues about what happened. The location is modelled after Templemead Station in Bristol, England. It's covered in ornate stonework and supported by arches. Because of the station's complex architectural narrative and gameplay requirements, not to mention its size, it was one of the most challenging and time-consuming structures to build in the game. Chief Inspector Peters and Percy. Chief Inspector Peters always seems to show up at the most emotionally fraught moments. He's the most philosophical of the constabulary. Percy, Arthur's brother, is one of the rare children you'll see in the game, but only in flashbacks. What actually happened to Percy is one of the game's mysteries. Because of his key role in the lore, his character design had to make clear that he was related to Arthur. General Byng. We first envisioned General Byng as a sort of James Bond type character, but as we developed his story, he evolved to being someone you don't necessarily like and can't necessarily trust. For thematic reasons, his look became more like Neville Chamberlain. Byng remembers the terrible things he's done, but he excuses them all as having been his duty. His office is in the military camp, where no one dares to question his memories or his authority. His character design reflects his status, wealth, and high opinions of himself. The military camp. The military plays a crucial role in our alternative history, and what better inspiration for a home army than that of the classic BBC sitcom Dad's Army? The difference is that our old army lost the war and are now essentially playing soldiers. Our army loves patriotic displays of marching, parading and saluting. They long for the next war, when they will finally get to redeem themselves. Their slogan is, "We'll be ready next time." Mystery House. The Garden District was the ideal location to explore the supernatural. When wellies turned their backs on the past, they lost their traditional faith. Now their unmoored spiritual longings make them easy prey for crackpot cultists. One of the most conspicuous locations in the Garden District is the Mystery House, which looms like a haunted manor. If you go inside, everything is mystical and surreal. You can understand why wellies might fall for the visionary mumbo-jumbo of an unscrupulous cult leader. The Weird Sisters and Johnny Bolton. The heightened folkloric quality of the Garden District makes it the natural home for witches and oddballs. The Weird Sisters have always taken a special interest in Sally. They're inspired by the witches in Marbuff. Johnny Bolton lives in a treehouse, pretending to be an 8-year-old boy who himself is pretending to be a secret agent. Rat Home. Rat Home is a dead island covered in skeletal trees, a wasteland due to chemical spills. Toxic fog paints a sickly green hue across the sky, its haze blocking your depth of field. We needed a way to bring some colour to the island, so we decided that the authorities put a cement dome over the main industrial leak. If you go inside the dome and breathe the fumes, you experience a trippy, psychedelic, and somewhat supernatural wonderland of illuminated dead trees. Weapons and weird props. We wanted unique props that you wouldn't find in other games. Some of the props are retro-futuristic gizmos, while others are based on everyday British objects that ground the world in reality. Weapons based on real-world objects, such as cricket bats and bayonet umbrellas, were designed to be both lethal and jauntily English. Because there were so many props in a game, we needed to create style rules, so everything would work together in context. Early on, we established a style with simplified shapes, exaggerated bevels, and realistic textures. The style is very much inspired by stop-motion animation. These are some examples of our silly, retro-futuristic tech, created by the 3D team. These props needed to feel kitschy and stylized, as if they could have belonged on a 1960s movie set, while also looking grounded and tangible. The artists exaggerated and simplified the shapes to get the 60s science fiction prop look, while paying close attention to details, such as dirt collected around edges, the bevels, the chipped paint, and small details like nuts and bolts. These, along with the believable tactile materials, ground the objects in our world. Every detail is considered. How would the object have been built? These are examples of props crafted from scavenged parts in the garden district. They are much more natural, organic, and detailed. They were tricky to execute because they have very specific design functions in the game. One example, the flaming axe, aka the no questions axe, is made of an axe, a power cell, and some other items found in the world. The artists had to cobble these pieces together in a way that makes the weapon look both cool and functional, while containing all the right pieces. User interface. The user interface, UI, bridges game design, psychology, and art. UI puts icons on screen during gameplay, the heads-up display, or HUD, to alert players to their status, when they are bleeding or starving or exhausted, as well as pointing them to their objectives. In the player's journal, the UI shows the player's inventory, among other things. Great UI design is so intuitive and transparent, the player barely thinks about it. Aesthetically, the challenge was to find an appealing graphic style that complemented the 1960s British retro-futuristic atmosphere. Duncan Kay was instrumental in establishing the early look of the UI, pulling from 60s British editorial design. As programming developed new functionality, Sarah Hamilton tried to balance clarity with quantity of information, while being aware of special considerations such as players with colour blindness. She drew inspiration from 1960s car user manuals, James Bond posters, Star Trek button panels, and atomic bomb safety graphics. Visual consistency was also important. All the clickable buttons needed to be the same colour, shape, and general location across the different screens. However, the screens needed to be distinct enough from one another that the player wouldn't be confused. Every decision was about how to trim the endless frustration of wanting a thing and not knowing how to find it. UI icons. Hey guys, so yeah, that was it. I hope you enjoyed my reading of the art from We Happy Few from Dark Horse Books and Compulsion Games. Now, I'm sorry if I couldn't really, pronounce many of the words. I'm literally, I'm still a kid, so I can't really pronounce that much. So I haven't really maturely grown already that I can pronounce every word in this book. But yeah, sorry if I couldn't pronounce much of the book. I tried my best. If you want to read this properly for yourself, I recommend buying it on Amazon or any other major bookstore that you can get the book. And I'll see you all next time. So, bye.